you realize whatever you pick as core, everything else will be what we call context. Very important. Still do innovation in those areas, but you don't get a prize for doing them brilliantly because you're not going to get competitive separation on these vectors. But if you do them badly, you're going to get penalized. So this whole distinction between what is core and what is context is an extremely important vocabulary for businesses to have in this era of global communications. And we need IT systems that can help teams in real time focus more of their energies on core and extract them from context. And that's where we're going to get to going forward. Just a couple of clarifications. This is not the same thing as core competence, although at one time your core competence undoubtedly was core. The problem is the world is catching up to all of us, and we are discovering that what used to be core isn't. Okay, we're still very good at it, but the problem is so is everybody else. It's also not the same thing as your core business. Your core business is where you make 60, 70, 80% of your revenues. That's often business trapped inside the yellow circle. It's old, big business. That's exactly the business that low-cost competitors attack. So if you look at this situation, we see what's happening here is something we call Darwin's dirty trick. And that is that all core becomes context over time. There is no such thing as perpetual competitive advantage. So every day we have a kind of a down escalator, and we work to differentiate, and all the competitors in our market work to neutralize, copy what we're doing. And so we start these initiatives, and when we first start them, they're highly differentiating. If you did online transaction processing in 1978, you had a differentiated enterprise. IT was giving you a competitive advantage. If you got into the early analytics, reporting and analytics in the early 80s, you had a competitive advantage. If you got the personal computers in, if you got over to client-server architecture, if you were using visualization and simulation, the early internet retail, but these things are no longer differentiating. Now there's more stuff. I mean, there's always going to be stuff at the top of this escalator that's going to come down. And I don't think we should worry about, oh my gosh, we're going to run out of innovations. That's not the problem. The problem is resources getting trapped at the bottom of this staircase. Because just because online transaction processing, it doesn't differentiate, doesn't mean you don't have to spend money on it, right? Just because the great systems of record no longer differentiate, doesn't mean they don't need maintenance. They do, right? And so when you look at this situation, you say, what is the management philosophy which says, how do you make a Darwinian response to this problem? How do I get resources from the bottom of the escalator back up to the top? And this is a really tough social problem. It's actually not hard to conceive. It's hard to execute. The conception is pretty easy. Here's the idea. I know what I want to do. I want to work with things that are core. And initially, when I sort of incubate them and invent them, I'm going to do it in an area where they're not yet material to my company's results. There might be a $10 million business line, a $20 million business line. Many of you here are billion-dollar corporations. So I'm going to experiment with it, see what I can do. Okay? Pilot it, incubate, skunkworks. If it works, then I do want to deploy it at scale, right? Peter Zengi and I are talking. A1S is right now, he's doing some very interesting things in Quadrant 1. He's got a very ambitious agenda for taking that to Quadrant 2. It's going to be pretty darn exciting. So that's great. And hopefully that will give SAP competitive advantage for a long time to come. But not forever. Never forever. So eventually, whatever is core will become context. And now you have to start managing your relationship to a business which is mission critical, meaning it's a very large part of your revenues, but the growth in the category is falling off, and the margin differentiation is falling off. And so you have this very uneasy feeling that I'm spending more and more of my resources getting less and less of a marginal return. And what you would like to do at this point is say, I'd like to manage that responsibility somehow off of my plate, find some way to divest or offload or some way offload it so that I could then invest in the next generation of innovation. This is sort of the Boston Consulting Group's, rising stars and cash cows and stuff like that, for those of you who are familiar with that model. Makes perfect sense. Gets a real challenge from the following place. We don't let go of mission critical context. We don't think we can. We say, no, I mean, even if it's a cost center, it's a cost center where quality is just critical. We can't outsource that. Or if it's a revenue center, we can't give that revenue away. We're trying to get more revenue. If we give revenue away, we're going in the wrong direction. And so instead of managing down our commitments to these businesses, we actually manage up our commitments to these businesses. And we get more and more and more of our total corporate capability stuck on the right-hand side of these diagrams. We said, what's the game plan here? And the first game plan is, look, if you've decided that a bunch of investments which used to be core have now become context, then you need to start extracting resources. And the first way you do that is you centralize those activities and you standardize them. And I would submit to you that was the great gift that the SAP R3 program gave to the world in the 90s. They centralized and they standardized an enormous amount of mission-critical context. And as a result, because some of you in this room are as old as I am, and you remember that there were 14 financial systems because the Japanese and the Italians and the French and the Russian, everybody had a financial system. Everybody had their own stuff, right? When you centralize and standardize, you extract an enormous amount of resources. You also extract risk. You start de-risking things because it's just one system, not 14. Okay? The next step is when you modularize and optimize. And what that is, this was the great business process re-engineering movement, also of the 90s. Where people said, we're doing things in silos, we're not doing them in an optimal way. Now that we have this client-server system of record infrastructure, let's re-architect our processes, and let's focus on order to cash, and let's focus on idea to product, and going down these cross-silo flows. And by the way, when we did that, we found all kinds of waste that we could take out. So there was more resources to extract, okay? From mission-critical context. But now we're at the next stage. And the next stage is I need to get it out of the company. Not necessarily the entire piece of work, but I need to take significant chunks. We've had some great successes with this. We've seen great successes with contract manufacturing. We've seen great successes with contract R&D. Despite some well-publicized cases to the contrary, great successes with call centers. Some limits. Many of you may have experienced them. But the issue here is whenever you outsource anything mission-critical, you can't let yourself in for a surprise. And instrumenting is the key predecessor to outsourcing. And I would submit to you that most of us who outsourced in the 90s actually just went from 1 to 6. We didn't really, we really didn't do any of the work in between. And we sure as heck didn't instrument it. We just sort of said, take my mess and do it for less, right?